Breaking news, civil war has just erupted in South Carolina. Confederate troops have fired on Fort Sumter and Charleston Harbor.
At 4:30 in the morning on April 12, 1861, the first shots were fired. Here are the facts on Cuneo News.
Well, this isn't exactly breaking news. There have been a lot of events leading up to this moment. Let's review. The most prominent factors to the beginning of the American Civil War was bad leadership, as decisions made by American leaders led the nation into a divisive war.
The Civil War has been a long time coming, dating back to the nullification crisis in the 1830s. To begin, the Tariff of 1828, passed by John Quincy Adams nearing the end of his presidency, raised the price of imported goods substantially. Northerners favored the bill as it strengthened their industry-based economy, while Southerners grew a deep hatred for Adams, tensions inevitably rising. A certain man, John C. Calhoun of South Carolina, specifically detested the tariff, stating that it was unconstitutional and thus should be voided. Calhoun wrote the South Carolina Exposition and Protest, where he argued that in the event that the federal government acted against the state's interest of a state, the policy could and should be disregarded or nullified. South Carolina acted alone, as most other states didn't want any problems with the federal government. In 1832, the tariff was up for renewal and was renewed by Andrew Jackson, a president with high regard for state rights, who would surely support nullification. But his true stance, he saw it as a threat to the Union, an unconstitutional theory that was to be shut down immediately. South Carolina passed the Ordinance of Nullification, which voided the tariffs of 1828 and 1832 within its borders. South Carolina also threatened to secede from the nation if further conflict ensued. The once growing tensions between the North and the South had become a strain on the nation, as Southerners felt like they were being attacked. The Force Bill of 1833 allowed federal troops to ensure full compliance of federal policy, and was a clear attempt to threaten the South. The conflict eventually came to a result with the Compromise Tariff of 1833, which reduced tariff rates a great deal. However, the long-lasting effects of the nullification crisis are apparent as the first shots of the Civil War have been fired.
I agree with you, Sean. Furthermore, James Knox Polk's policy towards the Mexican-American War is yet another cause of the outbreak of the Civil War. Polk fulfilled his promise of manifest destiny, which is a term coined by John O'Sullivan, that Americans were given the right by God to expand. So the American voters, as he gained Texas and the Oregon Territory, to expand westwards. While Polk did end up granting his promise, it only further tensions between the North and the South due to the addition of such a large amount of territory, as it caused debates and created conflicts over which states should be allowed to have slaves. At the time, the North and South had an equal number of states, but the North had a greater population than the South, resulting in them to have a larger majority in the House. This caused the South to want to have more representation in the Senate, and with the addition of new states with slavery, they could have this power, as they would outnumber the North. The North argued that President Polk provoked the Mexican-American War, a war between Americans and Mexicans in order to rob the Mexicans of their land, gain Texas, and use it to expand more slavery. These Northerners at the time were enraged, similarly to the Wilmot Proviso, as they claimed that the war was merely a war to expand slavery. Controversy occurred, as the Southerners believed that the war was not only a way to expand slavery, but it was a way to expand freedom by providing opportunities for prosperity and success. Polk's policy on the Mexican-American War was unjustified, as after the annexation of Texas, Polk continued to push deeper by continuing to push westwards, highlighting his aggressive policy to further expand the United States, something which the Northerners could not support. This highlights how Polk's policy further stimulated a divide between the North and the South.
This is how the Compromise of 1850 looked. There were many policies that served as preludes to the violence that would come. Both the Compromise of 1850 and the Kansas-Nebraska Act served to show the severity of sectional differences, which were only heightened by the ramming of these two acts down Congress's throat. Spearheaded by John C. Calhoun, Henry Clay, and Daniel Webster, the Compromise of 1850 was hardly compromised by any stretch of the imagination. Created by Calhoun, a notorious politician known for his views on slavery as a positive good, alongside Daniel Webster, a vehement anti-slavery politician, made success of this bill doomed from the start. It outlined that California would enter the country as a free state. The slave trade would be banned in Washington, D.C. There would be a stricter and more oppressive Fugitive Slave Act and would allow Utah and New Mexico to determine whether or not they would be free or slave states. Presented all at once, neither the anti-slavery North nor the pro-slavery South were willing to sign the massive bill. The infamous Fugitive Slave Act made it impossible for the North to sign the bill, and California being admitted as a free state would upset the balance in Congress and has made the compromise untouchable to those in the South. However, when the bill was split into its components, there were enough middle ground congressmen to pass all elements. Neither the North nor the South were pleased with the outcome and would divide the country along sectional lines. In addition, many who were previously ambivalent to the issue of slavery were forced into taking a definitive stance on the issue. This rift would continue to grow until the nation itself was divided. The lack of foresight from these three vital leaders would fan the ever-growing fire that threatened to engulf the nation. The Kansas-Nebraska Act, forced through Congress by Stephen A. Douglas, would allow both Kansas and Nebraska the right of popular sovereignty, or the right to choose whether to align themselves with the anti-slavery North or with the pro-slavery South. Because the two states were above the line drawn by the Missouri Compromise, which determined anything north of it would be free, and anything south would be slave, Douglas had to repeal the Missouri Compromise completely. As a result, thousands and thousands of citizens flooded into these territories to potentially sway the vote for it to be either free or slave. During the Bloody Kansas fiasco, clashes broke out between the two groups and would become a civil war before the Civil War broke out. Stephen Douglas refused to see that what he believed would be a peaceful solution to national issues was a colossal failure would bring the country to the brink of war.
While the issue of slavery was divisive between states, the Civil War resulted from poor leadership and exacerbated tension. James Buchanan, a lawyer from Pennsylvania, who served 5 terms in Congress and a decade in the Senate before he became president, believed the solution to the divide between the North and the South was in appealing to the constitutional doctrine. However, he failed to understand how sectionalism had become so extreme that the parties could not accept any other compromise, even if it cost ignoring the decision of the Supreme Court. By refusing to take a moral stand on either side of slavery issue, Buchanan failed to resolve the question, leaving his nation's greatest crisis to his successor. Shortly after his inauguration, the Supreme Court ruled on Dred Scott in a way that pleased many Southerners, and Buchanan failed to see how much it angered the North. When Kansas was awarded a popular sovereignty vote on its slave status, the violence that ensued, known as Bleeding Kansas, took him by surprise. When he decided to end the violence by urging admission of Kansas as a slave state, it led to a complete division. He angered the Republicans and alienated members of his own party, and Kansas remained a territory which simply delayed the resolution until the Civil War. By refusing to take a firm stand on either side of slavery issue, Buchanan failed to resolve the question, leaving his nation's greatest crisis to a successor. Due to the Republican Party taking command of Congress, Buchanan had a stalemate with Congress. He did not have enough leadership and deal-making skills to get a Republican-led Congress to create compromises. It was the Democrats, and as a result, almost no legislation was passed. Due to his poor leadership, the Democratic Party split into the northern and southern wings, which gave the southern fire eaters a political home in Congress. Due to the divide between the two parties, southern states began to secede. Buchanan asserted the federal government did not have the power to stop secession, and thus he allowed the move to secession to proceed until it was far to stop, and Lincoln could not do it either.
Critics say that causes such as slavery are much more important in leading up to the Civil War. What do you have to say about this, Sean?
While slavery has always been a problem within the states, bad leadership has only heightened these issues. Slavery wasn't always a decisive issue like this. During the founding of this nation, it was commonly agreed upon that it was a necessary evil and should be gradually eased out of existence if possible. Not until Calhoun introduced slavery as a positive evil did disagreement arise. The justification of slavery as positive and paternal was the catalyst that set off the chain reaction for anti-slavery and abolitionist movements along with pro-slavery movements, which have ultimately led up to this moment.
With the contributions of many negligent and poor leaders who could not solve sectional differences, the nation has been pushed into war under the most dire circumstances.
Thank you for tuning into this edition of Cuneo News.